Welcome everyone to this public hearing on the City of Greenfield's Community Development Block Grant activities. I've asked our friends in person to sign a sign-in sheet, so I would ask that folks on Zoom just add your name to the chat so we can get a sense of who is here. I'm going to go ahead and read the notice for the public hearing, and then I'll kick us off. By the way, my name is Anna Altman. I'm the Community Development Administrator for the city, and I'm joined by my colleague Christian LaPlante, who is the Economic and Community Development Assistant.
Yes.
Okay. Notice of public hearing, City of Greenfield. The City of Greenfield Community and Economic Development Department will hold a public hearing on August 31st, 2023 from 4 to 5 p.m. The hearing will be in a hybrid format held at the City Hall Meeting Room 14 Court Square, second floor, and on Zoom. The purpose of this hearing is to receive public comment on the city's Community Development Block Grant activities, CDBG, including accept community input on the proposed addition of new activities in the city's CDBG 2021 grant to utilize unexpended funds from the Public Infrastructure Project West Street Phase 2. Proposed activities include housing rehabilitation and improvements to the accessible entrance of the Olive Street Garage. The housing rehabilitation program would provide 0% deferred loans to make critical property improvements to homes occupied by low, moderate income households, and to accept community input on the cancellation of the CDBG 2019 Public Infrastructure Project GSET Leiden Woods build out. And just to give you a sense of where I'm heading, I thought I'd start by talking very briefly about what CDBG is and how the city uses it. That will kind of naturally segue into a discussion of the canceled GSET project. So I think we're going to talk about that briefly first. And then the remainder of the time, I'd like to hear folks' suggestions for how to reuse some unutilized funds, and also to talk a little bit, thinking ahead to future years about other projects that are on your minds as eligible potential CDBG projects. Okay, so Community Development Block Grant, it's federal money that gets dispersed to units of local government, which are states and cities. Different municipalities receive these funds in different ways. The way Greenfield gets it is basically through a grant from the federal government to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which then disperses it to what are known as mini entitlements, of which Greenfield is one. What that means is that we get a certain dollar amount every year, but we do still have to apply for the grant. So the amount is essentially guaranteed, but the projects themselves always have to be approved by the state. So the purpose of this program from the federal government is to help develop viable urban communities, in particular to the benefit of low and moderate income people. And this includes a wide range of different kinds of projects. It includes infrastructure, housing, economic development. The idea having been that these were a variety of programs that were each run individually through the federal government, and the decision to turn it into one program was that hopefully this would streamline the process and delegate a lot of decision-making back to towns and states, which it sort of does. It certainly does, but as I said, we do still have to get approval from the state for all of our projects. And one of the big conditions for that is that money has to be spent on eligible activities that meet the national objective of improving the lives of low and moderate income people. Not only does it have to do that substantively and qualitatively, we have to be able to prove it on a quantitative basis. And sometimes that trips up projects that seem otherwise like they could be really valuable for low income people. So there's a couple ways of thinking about national objective. One of them, the most common way that we tend to think about it, is basically in terms of the income level, the number of low and moderate income people in a particular neighborhood. You can figure this out by doing things like surveying neighbors to find out, what the average income is of a neighborhood. There's also HUD survey data, income survey data that is split up by census tract and block group, which is often what we do. So just so you're aware, the overall rate of low and moderate income people in the entire city of Greenfield is about 49%. So if we want to make the case for a project primarily benefiting low and moderate income people across the whole geography of Greenfield, we're kind of hampered by that 2% because we can't show that the majority of residents are low and moderate income. But what we can show is that residents in particular neighborhoods are majority low and moderate income and can benefit from particular projects. There's other projects as well that essentially benefit individuals, benefit low and moderate income people on an individual basis. So for example, we support through our public social services, the CSR food pantry. Each individual who visits the food pantry is assumed to be a low or moderate income person. So with all of that being said, and to move to, as I said, point 2 on our agenda, occasionally there are projects that were proposed in a way that meet this national objective, but that when the rubber hits the road in their implementation, it becomes impossible to actually meet the national objective. And that's exactly what happened with the GSET build out into Leiden Woods. So this was a project that was originally proposed in our CDBG 2019 grant. The idea was to allocate about $150,000 to GSET, which is obviously Greenfield's municipal broadband company, to build out their service to the Leiden Woods community, in particular the Leiden Woods housing development, which is income restricted. So we can say for sure that this would exclusively benefit low and moderate income people. And then also through doing that infrastructure build out, give access to other people in the Leiden Road neighborhood. And to get approval for that, our department had to do some income surveys, and they were able to show that that would also primarily benefit low and moderate income people. So that was the idea. Like I said, this was 2019. So as you can imagine, best laid plans, things started to kind of go off the rails with this project pretty early on in terms of their ability to build out their equipment and infrastructure to that particular area. So the original plan had been to basically hook into some underground conduits that were shown on town municipal surveys of that area. Once they started trying to crack into those, they discovered that the information on the surveys that they had been inaccurate. So they were going to have to basically do a workaround. And what they decided to do was to try to put their transceivers on the poles in that area, which if you've seen GSET around town is what they do in the downtown as well. What they discovered when they attempted to do that was that the poles in that neighborhood didn't have the tensile strength to hold up their transceivers. So that also became just materially infeasible for them. The next step then was to think about an underground access, trying to basically put in their own, trying to access through fiber optic cables, basically directly underground into Leiden Woods. It's very rocky terrain. That's why that wasn't plan A in the first place. And what they discovered when they attempted to do that was that, they had to basically do an engineering survey, and that proved to them that that would be extremely financially infeasible. So while this is all happening, CDBG grant money is helping to pay for the labor of the people working at GSET who are working on attempting this Leiden Woods build out. So if we can't hook up onto the poles, if we can't dig our way underground, the only remaining option to them was to try to license the existing underground infrastructure that is owned by Verizon. So that brings us basically to the spring of this year, at which point the state starts to tell our department that we need to close out this grant and we can't keep kicking the can down the road. This project either has to come to completion in a way that meets national objectives, so that supports low and moderate income people in Leiden Woods as it had been proposed, or that we'd have to cancel it. So where GSET stands now on Leiden Woods is basically that they have applied repeatedly for licensing from Verizon, and it's basically up to Verizon, to make that decision on their own timeline, which they're still waiting, or GSET is still waiting to hear from them. So it's basically stalled at this point. I spoke to the general manager about it, and they're very, they desperately want to be out there. They wouldn't have proposed this project if they hadn't, and the last thing they wanted was to have to return the funds. But unfortunately, that's where we find ourselves now. I know it's a bit long-winded, and I used a lot of words that I don't truly understand the technical meaning of. So you can certainly ask me any questions about sort of the administrative, operational side of things, but of course, there's only so much I can explain when it comes to the transceivers and receivers themselves. But Jenny, please.
So I have a couple of questions about that. I had heard something else that community builders, because I had talked to John Lunt, community builders had an exclusive contract with Comcast. So that is a different take on what I had heard about that, but I am a little concerned. You said there were poles out there, the poles that won't hold the equipment. Are they telephone poles that are not sturdy enough, or do you know?
That's what I was told, yes.
Okay. And I understand that that we may have to rescind that money, but I just wanted to say aloud, I am concerned because there are multiple apartment buildings in downtown Greenfield that harbor many people who are low to moderate income, and they are not served by GSET. And my understanding was that GSET was going to make affordable connectivity for all. So it's not just Leiden Woods, the Mill House and the Weldon, 91 Smith Street, and I believe the high rise, but I'm not 100% sure of that. And so I've spoken to John about this before, and then I got interrupted and we didn't finish the conversation. But I have great concerns that people who really need to have affordable connectivity are not offered the same benefit. It is a huge savings with GSET, and some of the people who may really need that aren't getting it. So should we be repurposing that for a different building that is not getting it? You know what I'm saying? That's my comment.
Well, I guess I'll respond to the last part first, which is that we can't repurpose these particular funds. The grant is now being closed out, unfortunately. But I think the broader point is really well taken. It's municipal broadband is to some extent a mission-driven organization. It's built right into its purpose is to make connectivity accessible and affordable to everyone in the town. And my understanding is that that's certainly still their goal, both in particular areas like Leiden Woods, where we know there are concentrations of low-income people by definition, and just in the sense of, they want to have everyone in Greenfield capable of having access. I think particular buildings, like it would absolutely need to be a conversation with GSET about what the holdup is on particular buildings. But I think a general statement is that, buildings that are privately owned, those owners have ultimate say over, which utilities have access to them. And just in my sort of cursory reading of this, my understanding is that broadband isn't considered a public utility in quite the same way that things like water and sewer are, which is very frustrating to think about. But it means that companies like Verizon and Comcast can have exclusive rights to the wiring, the infrastructure itself that they lay down, even if it's in public areas or under private buildings. So I think it would really depend in the particular cases that you're listing on the conditions there. Is that a new hand, Jenny?
I just to say again, when we all approved this, we said it was going to be affordable connectivity for all. And we have huge sectors of our senior and low income people who live in large apartment buildings that are not getting this service. Briar Knoll is another one. There's a lot of people with Section 8 that live there. They actually complained at a public meeting. And Anna and Christian, I totally understand that does not have anything to do with you, and that you're here and trying to do a great job with how this is spent. But I am concerned about people that need our representation here. That's all. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
May I go after Nancy?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, Pamela. Nancy and then Pamela.
Hi, thanks, Nancy Hazard. Ginny, I had no idea that the Mill House and those other places don't have it. That's pretty shocking. And I guess that's a good question of, what can be done about that. And whether CDBG money could be used in the future. My question had to do with the existing grant that's being closed out. If it is closed out, is it possible to apply in the future for the same or a similar grant? In other words, I mean, it sounds like, well, GSAID doesn't yet know from, was it Verizon? I can't remember, or Comcast, whether, what it might cost to partner with them and work with them. But so that's a hard, but maybe wait a couple of years, see if we can get the answer to that question, and then put in another grant for that area as well as the areas that Ginny just mentioned.
That's a great question. So if I understand what you're asking, a project that has now been canceled, is that then eligible to apply for in a future round as a new project? And I think the answer is yes. In fact, I think you could make a good case that, especially in a case like this, the need is even stronger than it was in the past, because the expansion is moving forward in other areas. And certainly the national objective hasn't changed, right? Those are still low income areas. So I would think the answer is yes. And that is probably something we'd be open to for future funding rounds too, if GSAID approached us with that need, for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be great. And I don't know what other research would need to be done in order for GSAID to be ready to put that kind of a proposal forward. But I would love for that worked on with clarity on particularly the places that Ginny mentioned, as well as Align Woods.
Thank you.
So my name is Pamela Goodwin. I do reside at the Weldon, and we have been trying to negotiate with John Lunt over there for well over a year. Originally, we were told it was a historic building. Then I personally met with Pocky Wieland and John Lunt, and he said, we'd like to get in there and take a look around and see if it's feasible, but we need a group of people signing that there's interest, which made sense to me. We weren't given a number. We went around and speaking with many people. I personally did a whole lot of kind of clipboard work. Some people pay close to $180 some for their television. I don't know if that includes internet. Most people there, many people, simply want TV. However, it cost me a whole lot of money for internet only. It has been it's called Xfinity now. My bill comes from Xfinity. I asked to get off of the TV and they took away a bunch of channels and said internet only would cost you more, which turned out to be a lie by Comcast, Xfinity. And when we met with John Lunt, other than just find out if there's interest, and we gave him probably close to 25 signatures. And we have a lot of people, 105 apartments. So we didn't go door to door because that presents a problem. But we did work with management and they said, sure, let's see if this is feasible. John Lunt himself sent the new regulation by the FCC. We no longer are forced to have a monopoly. There's been a change and we cannot only be offered Comcast. It's illegal, is my understanding. I have a piece of paper to that effect. And we went to shock it and the management says, you have all kinds of choices in the Boston area. By the same privately held company, you could choose X, Y, and Z. So when I talk to people and they pay 180 or 190, and I didn't get specific about is that internet and TV, I just know I heard all kinds of rates from the same company, which made no sense to me. I also will say that the Xfinity truck is there, the wiring is falling apart. They're always having to come in and do something with this ancient wiring over there. And we were never told that GSET is not interested. We had people come from the home office of Braintree. There was a private meeting with Mr. Lunt. We have a gentleman named Scott Cole who's very interested in helping us get affordable connectivity. But we didn't have a resident at the table. And I said to Pocky, why aren't we there? And so she recently said in a big meeting, and several city councilors were present and the home office, it's like stuff falls in a black hole and then we never hear back because we don't know where we are with this effort. And like I said, if they want 100 signatures, we're happy to get a lot more than 25, but that was news to me that you need a specific amount of money for them to feel like they can afford to do it. The last thing I'll say is when we were in the height of COVID and there was money for everywhere because children went remote. I had a meeting recently with Rep. Natalie Blay in Bernardston, and she did not like hearing that there's a section in Bernardston over there that also doesn't have internet. So this money flowed in big time, and there shouldn't be this distinction between we don't have time here or we can't go there, because I have to say, I agree with Councilor DeZorger. We're desperate to how to save money. You know, if they're going to give us SNAP, we're all elderly and disabled. If they're going to give us SNAP and keep us alive on food, then they also should make sure that we at least can get on the internet and search for things. People say, get on the website to old people all the time. One, they don't have a tablet or a laptop. I understand there's a program to help with that now. And two, they might not remember their password, because I have friends that couldn't ever get back on, but they used to be able to. And when they said we have to reach everybody, the government decided they needed to have phone calls available for the elderly and the disabled. Not everybody's going to jump on a website and look at everything. The people in my building didn't know about this meeting today. Two of them couldn't come. One of them is very ill. And I'm just kind of representing 105 apartments over here where we feel like something has been deceiving us, or there is just this massive miscommunication. And I, as a CNA, used to work over there at the mill house. So where's the money? And if we're going to need a whole new grant, then how fast can we get a whole new grant so that we can get people connected? Because something went wrong. And I thought that Elm Terrace didn't have it. If they have it, then how come they have it? You know, you start saying, why them and why not us? And that's what I think we're dealing with, a very poor city. We constantly hear how broke we are every budget year and all year long. So I just say, let's figure out how fast we can write a new grant and try to get people connected. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
And I'm not sure about protocol. Are we also talking right now about what can be done with these funds, assuming that they are not going to go to GSET at this time?
No. So to clarify,
Okay.
these funds are returned to the state, and there's nothing we can do about that. So we can, in our next agenda item, we'll be more forward-looking, but this is more about hearing folks' input on what has happened so far. Yeah, thanks. James, please. Oh, Counselor, you're muted.
Oh, she might just have the hand up from before.
My other thing, because I don't know how long I'm going to be able to stay on right now. I'm with my family and their 1.5-year-old twins and a 5-year-old. So I wanted to just say this. I'm concerned about shelter for the winter. And I don't know what the plans are for this year for CDBG funding, but I came on to this meeting because I'm worried about that. We have, the Days Inn is now full, and every year that is a place where our homeless could be sheltered. You know, there were churches, etc. that I think I see Amy Clark on this meeting. There were methods that we helped on these very cold nights, and we don't know when they're coming, to house people in the shelter. And that option is not going to be available to us. And, you know, you said a couple of things about you were supposed to take care of the people who actually needed the most. And I think it's September. And we all know that we're going to have winter this year. It's coming and it is going to be cold. We don't know when those nights will come, but we should plan ahead for that instead of when that need is in front of us. And could we take some money with, and I don't know if that was part of the topic or today at all, whether there was where we should spend money or it was just rescinding this, because I didn't carefully read the agenda, my bad. But if you are looking for a place to put anything, that is something that will be desperately needed this year. And I think that we should be planning ahead, because where are the people going to go? We've got a couple of, you know, I'm just naming these, you know, like Sanderson Street or the John Donne Center in the winter that at least have heat that, you know, probably have to be cleaned, you know, in the mornings afterwards. I don't know, and staff or staffing, I have no idea all the ins and outs of it. But again, it's almost September 1st. So that's all I'm going to say on that. But I think it's really something that September 1, we should be thinking about. So that's it.
Thank you. Yeah. And folks know that there'll be plenty of time in the next agenda item, but I just want to make sure in case she has to leave that she was able to say that as well. But we'll talk a bit more about that in just a moment. But George, I'm assuming you have a hand on our GSET project agenda item. George?
Yes, thank you. George Tlemcen, 27 Abbott Street. I apologize for being late and not really knowing where things are in the agenda right now. The thing that had particularly caught my eye, and it sounds like you may have covered it already, was the cancellation of the CDBG 2019 project of build out for GSET in Leiden Woods. It sounds like you've talked about that already, so I don't want to have to make you repeat. Say again, please.
Oh yeah, that's the agenda item we're still on.
Okay, so I just, again, didn't want to make you have to repeat yourself, but it seems like something that's important. I just wondered why, what's the rationale or what's the reasoning behind canceling that?
Yeah. Yeah, I gave my quick and dirty summary of kind of the series of events with the huge caveat that it has been a series of very technical problems that I am absolutely the wrong person to try to explain to you. But essentially, the chronology of things was that the mechanism by which they intended to do their initial build out to Leiden Woods proved to be infeasible. Their plan B did as well. There were a number of options that they explored, including basically blasting open the rock and trying to lay their own fiber that seemed to be prohibitively expensive. So the way forward to that particular community at this point is licensing the existing underground infrastructure that's owned by Verizon. And that is what GSET has applied to do and is attempting to do. And there's really no understanding of what the timeline will be for that, simply because it is up to Verizon at this point. So for this particular funding source, at this point in this year, we need to close out that grant so that we can get our next grant from the state. And so we were forced to cancel the project, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Anna. Sorry for the repetition. Appreciate it.
No, that's fine. Any other comment or thoughts about this project that has been canceled? Okay, I would encourage folks, it sounds like many of you already have, but to continue the conversation with GSET themselves, especially about build out to particular spaces. And we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is to accept community input on some new activities for CDBG. So let me sort of lay the groundwork for what we're talking about here. There's kind of two things. Anytime we introduce a new project to a grant, we have to hold a public hearing. And what we're attempting to do in the immediate term is to add about $20,000, $19,977.99 to the CDBG 2021 grant And I apologize, the dollar amount should have been in the public notice, and I will definitely do that in the future. But in terms of infrastructure, we know that's not a huge amount of money. We need to have a public discussion about what we're going to do with it, but I thought it would also be a good opportunity for folks to share their thoughts about the medium distant future prospect of our next funding round, because we do expect to submit a new proposal to the state probably next March. And so now is the time for some strategic planning about what we could put into a much bigger project. But the immediate concern is this approximately $20,000. And essentially the reason this is unprogrammed funding is that it was funds that came from the repayment of a housing rehab loan or several housing rehab loans that the city had held for however many years. And when that comes in, the state, through a new policy, has asked us to immediately add that to an existing grant. So what happened was that I believe my predecessor basically added it to an existing grants budget line, and that was this West Street infrastructure project. This doesn't actually have anything to do with that project. The project itself was given the exact contribution that we budgeted for, but now that it has been fully closed out, now we have to make a decision about what to do with this program income, is what it's called. So obviously, Christian and I are the Community Economic Development Department. We have kind of a running list of projects that we know are feasible for us and that we know need to happen. A big one that will never, ever cease is the need for housing rehabilitation funds, which is an eligible activity under CDBG. So that's certainly something we would consider opening up a project for. We've also just been in discussions about the Olive Street garage because our department has been talking about parking quite a bit, and we're aware that there's issues with the accessibility to the garage in terms of the entrance ramp and lacking a door actuator. So those are two things that we kind of floated around, and I put them in the notice to give you a sense of the kinds of things that we're talking about, but we're very willing to hear ideas both for this immediate pot of money and for future larger projects. So I think I'm happy to answer questions, but I would like to just gather some feedback. So please, Susan.
Okay, I would just like to build off what Councilor DeSordo was saying, because I think that we are in a serious situation right now. Because last year, just to give you an idea, last year we had, in terms of the unhoused population, we had absolutely no cases of frostbite, nor did we have anyone die during the winter. And that was largely because of days in. And obviously that, I want to say that I welcome all the immigrants that are there, but in terms of the unhoused population that is here right now, that doesn't help us to house them. So I know that there are some negotiations going on with several possibilities to figure out if there are ways that we can find some housing for folks for those very, very cold nights. And that includes everything from various buildings that are already in existence to some that are in existence but are closed, to possibly even having to put people on buses and drive them around on a cold night because we need to find a place for them to be. Since we unfortunately do not have a plan at this point, what I would like to ask is that these funds go into a contingency fund designated specifically for housing unhoused persons during the cold winter months. And that if there needs to be an agency, I think we can find one to connect that to. But the main thing is that we need to make sure that we have a plan. And I'm concerned that we'll have a wonderful plan and no money to support it. And granted, $20,000 is not a lot of money, but with some other funds, we may be able to figure out a way to make that happen. I was actually hoping it was more. But if that's where we are, that's where we are, and we should absolutely put that money there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate also as you guys heard me lecture on at the beginning, there's hoops we have to jump through in terms of what is eligible and not with the state. So it's also really helpful for me to hear kind of details of what it might look like. I don't know for sure whether a contingency fund of that kind would be an eligible activity, but it gives me some thoughts about what I can approach our reps.
There are agencies who are working in that field who I think if we went to them and said, would you hold this money in contingency for these things? And those are, we could find a way to do that.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Amy, please.
Hi. I would like to add my voice to both Susan and Ginny, and to say that as a representative of the Interfaith Council, our Housing Assistance Committee, we have been one of the groups to put people in motels, and so we are very much feeling the loss this year of the availability of rooms at the Days Inn. We do also put some people at the Red Roof in Deerfield. It's more expensive. And then we put people over at a little motel over in the North Quabbin area. But our main, I think last year, our little organization alone was 126 nights at the Days Inn in Greenfield. So that is some for individuals, some for families of up to 5. So it's a huge loss not having that available to us this winter. It is also, while it's not in any way an ideal way to handle where people spend cold nights, it is the least expensive. And so for $80 or $90 a night, we can put someone up for the night. When you're talking about opening a warming center, I remember the last time a couple of years ago when it was at the Salvation Army, Joe Comerford came up with $160,000 for ServiceNet to staff it for a few months. So it can be hugely expensive. We're going to have to forego the inexpensive way to manage it and come up with something much better. So I really do support putting funds aside, because we're going to have to do something. And I think everybody's looking forward to hearing what the upshot of the September meeting that the mayor is pulling together to see if there are some plans that that might be workable. Susan has pulled together Housing Greenfield, and also the Opioid Task Force has had an ongoing year-round group talking about these things. And yet here we are, September, without a plan. So I'm very concerned about what this winter will be, and would strongly hope that some of these funds could be designated, talking about the 20,000 from this year, but also looking forward to next year, because I doubt that we're going to be in a much a better situation next year with the renovation of the Well Street shelter ongoing, and with the expectation that immigrant families who are currently at the Days Inn will be able to find housing in the area or wherever for 40 or however many families are there now within the next year. Seems like a real struggle too in our community. So I think we may want to build money in for another year too. So thank you.
If I can just add to Amy, we've been told that the Days Inn will be occupied by immigrants for at least 18 months.
That's my understanding as well. George?
Thank you. I hadn't come here with the agenda item that Councillor DeSorger initiated, and others are weighing in, but I want to offer my agreement that that's such a high priority. I do outreach work for Clinical and Sport Options, and some of the folks I visit in the community, I visit in their tents, or they're living in tents. So it's an ongoing issue. I do know that the Franklin County Emergency Shelter on Wall Street is now ServiceNet was mentioned, but fairly recently the contract for that went to Clinical Sport Options. And obviously there are future plans for some more extensive build out of additional units. But I don't think, families were mentioned. I don't think anything would really accommodate families. So it is just a fundamental need. And I appreciate people putting effort and focus into this. And I think having some funds aside to help actualize some safe sheltering for people is a reasonable priority. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'd also like to chime in on that.
Please.
So I guess I have a few questions because every year, I mean, there are people that have been members of Housing Greenfield for like 14, 18 years. And every year we'll go like, uh-oh, winter's coming. And I thought it was also a concern or should be a concern for the safety committee that the city has. And I think it's been brought up before about a warming center. I have a dear friend who's on 24/7 oxygen and she was snowed in a different town, but you know, they got 4 to 6 feet of snow up there, no power, couldn't get the generator started. We don't have a backup generator in the Weldon, so we have backup lights, but if it's totally no heat in the building, we've been wondering where we would go. So it's, a warming center is the very least that we need to be thinking of. Go and get a hot cup of coffee and stay warm enough, whether you have power or whether you've been an unhoused person. The Salvation Army does a great job, and I think most of us know that they will keep you alive and warm, but you're not on a cot, so it's not a shelter. It is, they give some showers to some people, they feed you, and they will, you put your head on your backpack if you own one and take a little nap there. I cannot imagine that being a decent night's sleep for anybody, but at least you're not freezing to death. So we're way overdue. And there must be emergency money. I mean, when they shut down the Zahn Center and had to have everything go over there for emergency purposes during COVID, then there was no senior center for months and months on end. So I'm not opposed to using the Zahn Center as a warming center because first things first, our priorities are to keep people alive, I would think. Not that, can you go exercise or do you want to meet with Rep. Blay who goes over there some? So it's just, I guess it's appalling that we find ourselves in this predicament. So surely there's emergency money that I'm unaware of that the city has because they always come up with funding. Even the DPW, when all of a sudden there's the flood and there's no roads and there's no streets, there has to be money moved from point A to point B to deal with these emergencies. Or the sewers exploding, and it's not going to get any easier. It's getting worse and worse. And we know last winter was pretty hellish for some people and a real tough situation when plows can't even go and EMTs are snowed into their own houses and you can't call an EMT or an ambulance, you're dumb. You're so dumb. So I just want to echo what everybody else is saying. And this looks like a pittance of money when Amy is talking about the kind of funding that Joe Comerford got. And we're already looking for tons of FEMA money for plant destruction and all of the rest of it that's going on climate-wise. So just really say, we gotta dig deep, we gotta figure out, we gotta have a plan. And there better be, in my opinion, a plan that comes forth in September. Because we could get no fall, we hardly had a summer in many people's minds. If we end up with crap for a fall and then all of a sudden it's really a very cold early winter, then where are we? We can't say, where's Athena to write a grant? And I don't know if Athena still is a grant writer here.
She is, yeah.
Oh, good, she's great. We need money, but we can't sit around and wait for somebody to write a grant and get it approved and then we, So when you say this $20,000 is for 2021, and I guess my last question is, so who decides if that's going into a pot for specific emergencies for sheltering people in the winter? Like this is just a public hearing, so who gets the final say on how it all works?
So that's a totally fair question. Yeah. So the process from here would essentially be for our department to apply to the state, what was previously DHCD and is now the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, and make the case that a proposed project meets national objective, and then it would get added to the grant as its own project. Now, I don't know, to speak more broadly, I think to some of the suggestions that are coming in, I don't know that an emergency fund is an allowable expense in what is considered a non-emergency. And I understand that the governor has declared a state of emergency with respect to family shelter. So that is very pertinent to this. But a lot of what you're talking about in terms of emergency funding for people being snowed in or caught in their homes or caught without power is managed by the city's emergency management team, which is Fire Chief Strahan. And it is by its nature way more flexible money than grant funding, as you're observing. So I guess the question for us and that we're going to take back is, what are creative uses of grant money, which is much more stringently controlled, that could set us in a better position for whether or not we're able to put it towards an emergency fund? Are there other things that we can be building up and making ourselves more resilient for this or the next year? I think the next step for that is going to be talking to our contacts at the state to get a sense of what they think about it, and talking to some other communities to see if they've used CDBG for exactly that kind of thing, if there's a precedent. Yeah, Councillor.
Yes, how many, may I ask this of Amy Clark, how many nights did you put people up last year and the year before in shelters? Because that would be indicative of what was needed this year. That's one question. And then secondly, when is that meeting? Amy, you spoke of a meeting. So two questions. No, if that's.
We don't put people in shelters, Ginny.
I mean, in hotels. And how many nights did you?
In hotels. It was 126 nights from Thanksgiving on this past year at the Days Inn. We probably did another 50 nights over at the little motel in Orange. And then fewer we were over like 220 or something. Salvation Army also puts people at the Days Inn. They also have a contract with the Days Inn. And then CHD last year had a $50,000 grant from the Community Foundation of Western Mass, which was to cover both Franklin and Hampshire. I don't know how much of that was used, but they were also able to pay for some folks to be, quite a few, at the Days Inn or at the Red Roof. But their funds were gone in 3 weeks. They got them in January. Their funds were gone in 3 weeks. So, yeah, so that's our little, and our funds were from ARPA. The city gave us some funding for emergency, which was great. The Interfaith Council raises funds. The Opioid Task Force has given us some of their grant funding. And we are just a group of volunteers doing it. So we don't have a whole lot of, we don't have any financial person who is, overseeing, it's me who's overseeing the accounting of things and everything, very simply. So we aren't grant writers or, accounting for those sorts of things, but we've done the best we can with our volunteer group to make sure that every penny that comes to us goes directly towards housing. So last year we spent, I think, 75,000, almost 80,000 total last year on all of the motels. We also bought many tents. We have bought sleeping bags. We have bought hand warmers. We have bought gift cards to Dunkin' Donuts. So during the blizzard last winter, folks could have a reason to go sit in Dunkin' Donuts with a $10 gift card for 5 hours and warm up and get a cup of coffee and donuts. And I mean, our funding is, all the funds we raise are totally flexible, so they can be used however, and we can react very quickly when we get in. I had a call yesterday for a gentleman who needed a couple of nights at the Red Roof because of a crisis death in his family. So, I mean, we can work really fast with things for a whole lot of different reasons, but cold is the big reason facing us coming up. We spent far more than we ever have in the past last winter. And I just know this winter stands to be the same or more difficult. So, the meeting, I don't know the mayor. I don't know the date either. And perhaps you do. I've just heard that the mayor's pulling together a meeting in September with organizations that are going to be dealing with, I think, the immigrant situation and hopefully unhoused folks who are in our town already.
Yeah, that's right. There will be a coordinating meeting at the end of September. That's just between the mayor's office and our first responders and service providers. And the doodle poll is still out, so I don't have an exact date yet because we're trying to coordinate the time to coordinate, but that's in the next couple of weeks.
Mm.
Did you want to say more and then Susan?
Yeah, I just follow up and then I'm going to go. But I really think that just the number of nights that Amy said that her organization had used would be a good reason to use why we should be using community block grant funding for that, because we're not going to have a place to put anyone. So I think you could make a good case for that with the number of nights alone that your organization, Amy, used, and Salvation Army. So that's all. I'm done. And thank you. I'm going to leave because I can hear a little crying downstairs. Over and out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree that that data is really helpful, Amy, to understand what the price tag might look like simply to fill what we have done in the past. Please.
Just one thing, I would like to emphasize the whole question of overnight stays, because that's when it's coldest. And that's when people who otherwise might stay in their tents during a less cold period say, this is it, I can't do it anymore. So we're looking at 10 degrees and below. And the John Zahn has been used for warming center, daytime warming center. The library is now available, but the fact is we don't have right now that overnight space. And that's the big crunch. So I know that, as I said, I know that there's some discussions, but which I have not been involved in, but I've heard there are some discussions. But the issue is, what do we do for those nights in particular? Because that's going to be the major problem.
I'm just trying to think outside of the box a little bit about the overnight problem. This is not in this city, but my daughter runs a hospital in Milford, and they have whole wings that are shut down because they don't have a staff. And, so you might think, I don't know how, they seem really crowded. They're very crowded at Cooley Dick. I know that because we couldn't get my friend out of the ER and upstairs. But as far as an overnight place, and maybe they have the beds that already can roll in and roll out or do something quickly, that's a question for somebody else to tackle as far as like having no local hotel available.
It's interesting. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, and I actually really appreciate the creative thinking about this, and I don't mean to respond with the negative reinforcing the parameters of the grant rules, but with something like CDBG and really anything that the city does to shelter, we do have to consider staffing as well. And those aren't going to be costs that we can necessarily pay for with the block grant, unfortunately, but that's not to say that it shouldn't happen. It's just thinking, where can we fit in with this particular funding source? And something that funding isn't necessarily going to solve in the short term is that there are staff shortages for service providers in general. And I know CSO has only just really been able to fully staff up their operation. So that's for sure a challenge as well. Other comments or questions?
Can I just ask, is the first grant that we this one is, the money's going back to the state, like the deadline is now, and so that's gone?
The money that was allocated to the GSAT project has gone back to the state.
And so is there additional money that still has a time frame on it? Well, because we did agenda item 2 first, and now we're talking about this one. So this agenda item is only for 2021. right?
Yes, and this is a little confusing as well because basically we name each grant after the fiscal year in which it was given to us, but then the grants will extend obviously past the year in which we received it. So the 2021 grant, we are meant to close out by the end of this calendar year. And this 20,000 is basically the last project in that grant that has to be used. Then we're just now in the process of starting up the next grant, which confusingly is affectionately called 2022 and 2023 because of they basically allocate us a 2-year grant all at once. So that one's starting up now, and that includes some projects that we haven't even begun. It does include a $20,000 allocation to the Well Street Shelter rehabilitation. For soft costs associated with that. But again, that doesn't help us in the short term with the immediate issue.
So in terms of the accessibility for disabled people at the Olive Street garage,
Yeah.
that's a full go, or that's got a money problem?
Yeah, that is not currently a project that has been proposed or funded. That was something that we have talked about in our office as something that might be a small, discrete enough project to basically use this 20,000 to cover. And I wish I had more information about the garage as an issue, but my understanding is that that isn't a project that's in the works anywhere else in the city. So it would need grant funding to make it happen.
Okay. In the past, I have talked about why there's no crosswalk, because you park in that garage and you got to go way up here and wait forever, or down further to cross.
Across Olive Street.
Yeah, to come across. And so that's kind of a separate issue, but I guess I'm waiting almost with bated breath to find out if we're going to implement the wonderful ideas that came out of that grant. I think it was $25,000 parking grant with all kinds of great things. I don't know when we're going to find out if we are getting the parallel parking and we're going to remove the traffic mess up here. Because I was at the last presentation and I don't know if it's not on the agenda for September, then I guess I will make a public comment, which doesn't matter much, just saying, where are we, on this? Because a lot of traffic study, a lot of people were very impressed with the presentation that he gave a couple of different times.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, so there was a parking study. It was not funded with CDBG funding, but
I'm off topic, I know.
Yeah.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. I can tell you that, the recommendations are being discussed basically weekly in our office and with the mayor. And we're kind of in a tiered approach now where we want to start rolling out some changes bit by bit. There was a lot in there. In terms of parking on Main Street, that's going to be a future problem as they do the Main Street reconstruction in a couple of years. So that the switch to angle to parallel, should that materialize, that's definitely not going to be in the next.
So it's 2 to 3 years away.
That's right, yeah. With the broader reconstruction.
Good to know. I'll call Marlo and give him my 2 cents.
There you go.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. I guess I will close the public hearing at just about 3 minutes after 5. So thank you, and please be in touch with us. I hope you all know how to reach us through the website. You can email us anytime. Take care.
Very good.